broadcast. We're on. Hello. Hello, everyone. Good evening. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Carson Keisinger. I am the Reference and Adult Services Librarian here at the Bennington Free Library. On behalf of the Bennington Free Library, I am really delighted to welcome you to this snapshot event, Gather with Vermont Reads author Kenneth, oh gosh, I do this every time, Cadow. Oh, I have such a hard time. So the trick is it rhymes with avocado. Except that since the fall, when we began our Vermont Reads, I've been saying it the wrong way, which I'm not going to say right now. Cadow, Cadow, Cadow. Say it with me. Okay. Snapshot, what we're calling this, the Snapshot series, is a Vermont Humanities weekly program that hosts a variety of speakers at public libraries to foster resilient communities. I really do need my glasses. Let's do that again. Snapshot is Vermont Humanities weekly program that hosts a variety of speakers at public libraries to foster resilient communities through engaging conversations. We extend our thanks to our partners at Vermont Humanities, as well as to the generous underwriters who make it possible for us to offer such rich and robust programming. The sponsors of the entire Snapshot season are the Vermont Department of Libraries, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and the Alma Gibbs Donchian Foundation. Tonight, we come together from across the state to listen, to learn, and to be inspired in community. Before we begin, I have a few brief items. First, we want to thank Catamount Access Television, CAT TV, for providing tonight's live stream and later a recording. I would like to feature the library's latest collaboration with CAT TV, Read Around the Museum, a tour of the Clark Art Institute with our youth services librarians. It is available to watch. You can find it right now on the library's homepage or CAT TV's YouTube channel. Remember that when it's a rainy day in April. Watch Read Around the Museum. Speaking of April, the library will host its third annual Earth Day Craft Supply Swap on April 19th from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. Drop off donations of clean and unused craft supplies during the library's open hours, please, from Monday, April 14th through Friday, April 18th. You don't have to donate to shop on Saturday, April 19th, but bring some bags to carry your goodies home. All items are free while supplies last, and you get new craft stuff, and it doesn't go in the landfill. Yes. The next Vermont Humanities Snapshot event will be Bone Yarn, New York Slavery Poems, with actor and poet David Mills. That will be hosted by the Manchester Community Library at 5:30 p.m. on Tuesday, April 1st. And a writing workshop with David will also follow the next day at 11 a.m. And now, finally, it's my pleasure to introduce to you our speaker. Kenneth M. Cadow is an educator and writer who lives in Pompanesett, Vermont. Gather is his first young adult novel. He is currently co-principal of Oxbow High School in Bradford, helping to oversee a mere 400 students. Cadow is the father of 3 remarkable adults and lives with his wife and their dog, Quinny. Please join me in welcoming Ken.
Thank you very much. Really great to be here. It was really wonderful to be driving in sunny weather. Getting here today over. We drove past Bromley and just lovely drive down. Really appreciate seeing, as part of the Vermont Humanities, reading so many corners of the state. I think this is the most southeastern corner I will get to. Southwestern, yeah, right. So I thought I would read. How's the audio? Good? Good. From a few sections, I really wanted to, as spring's coming, this seems it's very autumnal kind of book. So as spring rolls around, it's a little harder to pick some selections. But with Mother's Day kind of coming up in spring, I think I wanted to celebrate Ian's mom a little bit. and celebrate some of the other folks who have supported him in his life. The very beginning, when the dog comes and he's not allowed to keep it, just when his mom, who's been sliding quite a bit, happens to be with it enough to tell him we don't have enough money to to keep a dog like that, he hides. He sort of tries to train the dog to stay and hide in the shed. So the very next day, after the dog has come into his life, next day when I came home, my mom seemed more normal, so I expected a goddamn lecture about taking in a stray. I'm like, did Terry come by today? And she's like, no. And then when she didn't lay into me about the dog, I went out to the work shed as soon as I could. He wasn't there. It's the closest I'd come to crying in probably 3-4 years. So I'm standing there trying to suck it up when he comes around the corner with an apple in his mouth. I guess I might have got a little choked up. I don't know where you came from, but I sure do hope you stay, I told him. I thought I'd name him Hunter at first, since he knew how to take care of himself. But since he was eating mostly vegetables he found on his own, well, that's how I came to name him Gather. So something I have to say is about the word gather. It means a lot of things, like gathering food, gathering your thoughts. When somebody who listens, somebody like the Sharp, when she asks you what it's like to grow up the way you're growing up, you gather together all these parts of your life and all these stories of things from way before, things that get mixed up with what's happening right then. Those stories don't come out like a goddamn timeline. They come out like compost. All the leaves, the coffee grounds, fireplace ashes, apple cores, tea bags, onion skins, eggshells, corn husks, potato peels, everything that turned to dirt at one time or another, doesn't matter when. It belongs with whatever you've got growing out of it right there in front of you. Doesn't matter either if you're talking about sugar snap peas, tomatoes, pumpkins, or weeds. You can't go pulling all the dirt away from the roots, trying to put it in some kind of order so you can understand it your way. You kill it if you do that. Stories we tell come out like the way you walk the woods if you want to know it. Zigzagging, doubling back, maybe tripling, sometimes enough to find out the parts you know the least about are the parts closest to home. You don't just make some frigging beeline to some hill like you're trying to get your steps in. I just don't understand people like that. I don't think they're from around here. But I feel like you need to understand this. Our stories from around here come out like the way we keep our work shed. You go in there, you see what you have lying around, some of it being old as hell, some of it being stuff you might have even had the money to buy for yourself. You move something, you find something else. You brush it off a little and then you use it or you set it back down. But you need it all to piece together how things come to be the way they are now, how you come to be who you are. And when things go to hell in your own life, the word gather means something else all over again, because there's a lot of good people, some who you know, some who you only just met. And the ones who matter, they listen. They gather on your side, and at least they try to help you, even if it might not all work out. I know that for a fact. All that being said, I'm definitely getting ahead of myself here. Right then, I was just goddamn glad to have that dog. So Ian's mom is going to look for a job at a cafe that she heard about. But the car battery is dead, and they aren't able to start it. So Ian goes over to his neighbor's where he's been offered sort of part-time work, Mrs. Elsley. And she has folks around, she has her family in town they've been there for Thanksgiving. So Gather and I went over to Mrs. Elsley's house, me just wondering what I'm leaving behind with Mom and drugs and all. Emmett and Luke were already gone, and there's really nothing needing doing. So I offered to cut back all the brush growing up alongside that outbuilding there where I'd taken the grill from not even a week before. Not even a week before, that's what I mean about time. Seems like it might have been a year and a whole different life. Mrs. Elsley said she thought she had a gas-powered brush cutter in her garden shed, so Trent, that's Sue's husband, her son-in-law, he found it and tried to get it going. I kept quiet watching him work at it, but it pretty much convinced me he's probably the one who burnt them steaks or veggie burgers, more likely, on the grill Mrs. Elsley let me have. And while I'm looking around the garden shed so as not to be all embarrassed for him, I spot these four studded snows leaning against the wall under the cobwebby window there. They sure as hell aren't going to fit Mrs. Elsley's Subaru, but they should be fine on Terry's car. Learning by doing, I guess is what I say to Trent after he gives up on the brush cutter and I have a go. 99 times out of 100, the carburetor's the problem. This time, too. I pulled it out to give it a good soak. As it turns out, they were heading down to town to pick up a few things. I told them about our battery problem and asked them if we could catch a ride. I got close to our house. As I got close to our house, I got a bad feeling in my gut about Mom, pretty near sick to my stomach by the time I turned the handle on the kitchen door. But there she was, at the sink, washing up pots and pans from the Thanksgiving dinner. So that's how we end up in the back seat of the Audi, with me in the middle, Mom behind Sue, and Mrs. Elsley behind Trent, who at least knew how to drive a stick. I have to give him that. Gather stayed home. On the way, I asked Mrs. Elsley if she needed those tires. "Oh, that shed," she says. "I have no idea what's in there anymore. The tires were probably for my husband's car. I should just throw everything in there away." I'm like, "Well, I hope you let me have a look around in there first." And Mom elbows me there in the back seat. She's mouthing, "Ian." And later, when I asked her what that's all about, she's like, "You can't just go asking people if you can dig through their stuff." I guess I understand what she was saying, but that's what I mean about people thinking everything is garbage, because those tires did end up on Aunt Terry's Taurus. I waved her down in town a couple days later and let her know about them. She ended up with them, but she never used them to come up Maple Hill, far as I know. She never came by our house ever again. I guess she and Mom must have had an argument I never knew about. Some people, they just drop out of your life. So Trent asks us where we want to be dropped off, and Mom says anywhere near Angels will be fine. Trent says, how about right in front of Angels, since that's on their itinerary too? And I feel Mom get all slack tense, not wanting the neighbor's Audi-in-law listening in while she's asking for a job pouring coffee for tips. For reasons I didn't want to tell Mom, I had all my money with me. I slipped her a 20 to spend at Angels. Berryman's Fuel shares the parking lot with the thrift store, and it was to Berryman's I went first. The door has an hour sign on it, and when you push it open, it triggers a copper bell with a clapper that just scares the friggin' hell out of you. Other than that, the place looks like it's just somebody's house, which I guess it is, all their trucks and tanks being down on the North Bank Road. Mrs. Berryman is parked behind an old wooden desk working away at a big green book. The lamp on her desk is green too, with a gold pull chain dangling from it. Everything about the place reminds me of this field trip we took to a museum village back when I was maybe in 3rd grade. Mrs. Berryman doesn't even look up at me. "Don't tell me you ran out of propane yesterday," she says. My jaw nearly hits the floor, but I don't have a chance to ask her how she knew, let alone say hello. "You would not believe how many people run out of propane on Thanksgiving Day," she says. "You'd think people only use their ovens once a year. How many gallons is your tank?" Well, I have no idea, and I feel funny. Haven't said nothing yet, so I say, "It's about," and then I show her how big it is using my hands. "What's the name on the account?" she asks. I'm not sure about that either. I'm like, "Dwight Henry?" Mrs. Berryman sighs and pushes herself out of her chair, goes to this bank of wooden drawers and pulls out a file. "What's your address?" 3672 Maple Hill Road? She slides the folder out. "George Henry?" she asks, which was Gramps, meaning I guess my dad never got around to putting his name on the account. I nod. She opens it up. 125 gallon, but you haven't filled that tank in 9 years. 9 years! That must be a record. I doubt if it's safe anymore. Just a minute. Mrs. Berryman goes through a swinging door and leaves me alone. Well, my heart's racing and I can hardly breathe. She's talking safety and 9 years, and my dad's not on the account. It all sounds like a family investigation waiting to happen when all I want to do was pay for some goddamn propane. I'm wondering if I'd be smart to get out, but then she's back, Mr. Berryman right behind her. He's got a white mustache so crazy thick you can't tell where it stops and his nose hair starts. He doesn't say anything for the longest time, just looks at me over the tops of his thick-ass glasses, and I'm finding myself standing beside myself again. But part of me is wondering why he's wearing them glasses if he's just going to look over the top of them. George Henry's boy? No, sir, I tell him. I'm kind of knowing I've gone all formal and military. Dwight's. George was my grandfather. He nods and says, George's father, Laurent. He'd be your great-grandfather. He'd have been your Nana's husband. He was just a few years ahead of me in school. I'm like, wow, you're holding up pretty well. I can see he's going to chuckle, but instead it turns into a phlegmy cough, and he goes to the door and hawks out a big sloggy spit onto the sidewalk. Mrs. Berryman's like, Arthur! But he waves her off. I'm going to be straight with you, he says to me. Running out of propane is expensive. By law, we have to pressure test your lines and check all the appliances, and that's before we charge you for the propane itself. The only reason I came into this place was a vision of Mom going home after her interview at Angels and me turning on the stove and surprising her. I pulled my money out of my front pocket. I have $210. Cash, Mr. Berryman says, and he looks at me long enough I feel just hideous goddamn awkward. I've been in this business 66 years, and I've never once had a kid walk through the door wanting to pay cash for a household tank refill. Arthur, Mrs. Berryman says, what are you getting at? My pits start to sweat and I can hardly swallow. I'm sure he's going to call some agency or who knows what. Mr. Berryman wipes his mouth and leans on the side of an old stuffed chair. He motions to a wooden chair with a green leather-covered seat. Sit down, fella. I'm okay standing, I say. Please sit, he says again. So I do. My mouth is so dry I can hardly swallow. We've got to talk numbers. How do you heat your house? Oil? Hot water? Oil? Clothes dryer? We don't have one. Fridge? Electric? Generator? Gasoline, I tell him, then try to swallow. It isn't working, but it's on my list. Mrs. Berryman left the room at some point, but she comes back with a glass of water, which she hands to me. I'm like, thank you, and I take a big swig. So it's only the oven range unit, he says. I will tell you what. We'll waive the safety check fee this time, and we'll deliver a new tank free of charge. But it's going to take more than $200 to fill it, and you need to promise to fill it more than once a decade. Why don't you bake a little more? Take up making cookies or something. Give me $200 now and save $10 for yourself. We'll carry the balance and work it out later. You have a lot on your shoulders, young man. Who you have at home? My mom, I tell him. It's coming back to me, he says with his hand cupping his chin. Your dad's down to North Carolina? Memphis, I tell him. Tennessee. Graham's in North Carolina. I give him my money, $3.50s and $3.20s, feeling both good and sick as to how fast I just spent it all. Have you talked to anyone about getting aid? He asks. There are programs. I tell him I just want to do it myself. He nods, which I appreciate. Mabel, he says, go see if we've got a tenner somewhere lying around. And off Mrs. Berryman goes again. So Ian's recapping the month of December and his first experiences and his mom's experiences of working in Angel's Cafe. What else? I worked in the cafe from open to closing over Christmas break and made those Monday calls to Mrs. Elsley's daughters while Mom was cashing out the register. Sylvia came in. Sylvia's a budding love interest in Ian's life. Sylvia came in with her whole family for breakfast, twice on their way to skiing somewhere. And when Anya, the little sister, who I find out later is in 3rd grade, spilled her milk into her pancakes and onto the table, and instead of it dribbling into her lap, it's dribbled on into her brother Timo's lap, you'd think all hell'd break loose. He was 12 at the time, and mad, of course. But their mom jumps up with napkins and stops the flow, and the dad uprights the glass fast enough. There's still milk left in it, and Sylvia picks up the pancake plate and drains the milk onto an empty saucer, holding the pancakes back with a fork. I went over with a couple of dish rags. I gave the driest one to Timo for his snow pants, and I wiped up what they couldn't get with the napkins. There's only 4 other tables in the cafe, plus 4 seats along the window bar there, but everybody's just going about their business. I tried not to watch Sylvia's family too much, or be any different around them or her, which gets you all kinds of messed up in the head. Well, Sylvia, she came in once by herself and ordered tea and a scone. I'm still trying to figure out the point of scones, to be honest, I say to her. After she's gone, Mom smirks and says, "Who's the girl?" Danny Bernard also came in a couple of times. He told me Drew moved in with a girlfriend, Cassie, down the valley in Mills Falls. She's good for him, he tells us. She's trying to get him to finish out school down there, maybe get his DEG. Mom overhears and comes out. "Are her parents okay with Cassie's boyfriend living there?" she asks. Danny's dropping pennies and pocket lint into the tip jar. "Who said anything about parents? Cassie's 18. They have their own apartment." I didn't know what to think. I guess I wondered if we'd still been hanging around together, if Drew would have sped me up on the girl front, or if I would have slowed him down any, or what. After Danny leaves with his coffee and bacon and egg sandwich, Mom shakes her head. "You do know it's GED, not DEG?" Then she mimics him. "Who said anything about parents? Danny has no idea what it means to be a parent." That's the kind of thing you look back on and realize your mother was doing the best she knew how to do, and that she loved you. So Ian ends up on a little road trip with his teacher, the Sharp, and her partner Christine, and she does a little shopping for him. It's his first time ever staying at a motel. And I wanted to read this section because with all of that responsibility that's in Ian's lap, can kind of forget, it's possible to forget, who he is in the world. Well, I'll just start reading at this point. So Christine's bought him, in addition to buying him some clothes, Christine has bought him a bathing suit because he saw an indoor pool. "I need my key card to let me into the pool room. There's no one else there, and you can't believe the smell of chlorine. There's no diving, so I don't. The place is echoing and shiny and full of straight lines and 3 fake palm trees off to the right there. I go down the steps till the water's up to my waist, and I'm just standing there listening and looking around till I dunk my head under the water and swim to the far end, this whole place to myself. It's hard to believe and almost hard to breathe, not wanting to be the only sound of life in a place like this. I'm just used to rivers, I guess. I'm standing there with my head just above water, feeling my scar on my face with my fingers and looking around at all these air vents in the ceiling. Must be 30 feet high when a family comes in, a mom, a dad, 3 kids, all girls. The 2 biggest might be twins, maybe 4 or 5 years old. They've got plastic blow-up pillows right around their arms for floating. The kids screech and giggle, and the dad drops each of the older 2 into the water and they splash. The mom takes the stairs with the littlest in her arms. You just watch stuff like that. Families. I can breathe again. Dunking my head and holding my breath, I hear the motors of the circulator pumps and the splashes of the kids. When I come up, one of the twins is doggy paddling right over to me, looking like she's on a mission. "Leah," calls the mom, and it's echoing. "Mind your own business." "It's fine," I say, because it would be weirder still to say nothing at all. She says, "She's okay." My words echo. I'm just watching her determination, Leah's. This kid, Leah, she paddles right up, and then she's just bobbing, looking at me. Doesn't have to tread water or anything on account of those floats. I say, "Hello." The whole family's watching. She says, "Hello." And she keeps looking at me, not at my eyes so much, but my face. So I smile. "Are you a man or a boy?" I don't even know how to answer that. I might have chuckled a little. You can think about that question for years, maybe until you know you become the answer. But she's still just looking at me, so I say, "I don't know. In between, I guess." "How'd you get your owie on your face?" she asks, and I'm like, "What?" And she says, "Your owie. How'd you get it? Does it hurt? So I understand, and I'd never be able to explain the railroad bridge and the train and gather being terrified. So I tell her I got it when I was playing with my dog. And right there you can see she decides. You were playing with your dog. She says, you're a boy. Thank you. Thank you. I wanted, I'm here for questions, comments, thoughts. Yeah.
I wanted to ask how old you were when you wrote that book.
I started when I was 39, and I finished. I picked it up again. I think I was, I'm trying to do the math, 55. Yeah. I mean, I tried different. So that's really part of the story of writing this was when I was getting my master's degree at Dartmouth, and I was taking an oral history class, and I really wanted to do an oral history on something I knew nothing about. And originally, my intent was I had a number of intents, actually, but one was to, and I got this one approved, to interview people who somehow made their money either through tourism or water power or whatever along the Connecticut River and its tributaries. And it turned out pretty much everybody who did was gone, had died. Meaning anybody who worked, in Stratford at the mill where, or any of the logging mills or any of those, they were all gone, and there were, so I ended up finding 3 people, and one of them actually died while I was getting my approval. So I just realized this just wasn't something I was going to do or be able to do as an oral history. So I was bemoaning this when I was sitting in my cabin and I heard a gunshot go off in the woods, and I thought, oh, hunting's something I really don't know a whole lot about. So I got myself invited to a lot of hunting camps, and so this was 1999, and I was struck by a couple of things, one of which was the stories that they were telling in there. And just the other thing, I've been involved, with teenagers for a long time. At that point, I wasn't teaching, but I had done some work in schools, volunteered with my own kids in schools, and had hired a lot of kids in a previous job when I owned my own business. And what I was struck by at the hunting camps was this was a multi-generational, every person leaned into the experience. The kids knew stories by rote, such a beautiful thing. And so that was one thing I knew. And another piece that emerged was folks hunting, folks from, buying the land and posting it and not really understanding what they were stopping or what they were impeding in terms of this beautiful way of life. But the people in the hunting camps there wasn't vitriol about it. It was just there was just conversation and talking about, oh yeah, well, when we used to be able to hunt that. And actually one hunting camp, it was a recent occurrence that they'd lost about 300 acres. And I happened to know the family that bought it and posted it. And I thought, boy, it would be really interesting if one of these boys, sort of fell in love with the daughter, and then later found out, that this was the family that posted the land. So I sketched out a plot. But the problem was, as I would try to flesh that into a story, the main character whined too much, and I just couldn't stick with that story. So, and I kept kind of taking a dab at it for on and off for years. I go up to my cabin every weekend and spend, a number of hours writing. And I was reworking an essay, this literally 20 years to the day later in November on a Saturday. And I was sick of reworking this essay because it was getting to the point where it was a story. It was an essay about why does my border collie, like, what are the criteria? What's his flow chart for deciding whether or not he should chase an animal? And like, he doesn't go, if he even sniffs a bear, he turns tail and runs home. But he'll chase deer, and gray squirrels are primo. He's chased a coyote past my cabin window. Couldn't care less about a chipmunk, but a red squirrel sometimes yes, sometimes no. So anyway, it was like I was happy about this essay, but I was getting it to a point where it was trite. And I thought, okay, so I flipped the page and just pictured this kid running down the hill in the rain. And I followed him all the way to school, and then as he was looking at the doors to the school, I thought, I don't want to look at him. I want to look at the school through him. And at this point, I had 20 years of experience as an educator, and then all of a sudden I realized this is the kid for that plot. And then I took a walk in the woods because I just had the wildest heebie-jeebies about, wow, he showed up, and then it was kind of like a sickness. I had to write, every chance I got, and finished that in about eight months to send the manuscript off. Yes, hi.
Well, I enjoyed reading Gather, and I love hearing you read from sections of the book. Somewhere I heard that you had to modify Ian's language so that, the rest of us could understand. And
Yeah.
it rings very true to me of what kind of a boy, man he was. I wondered, could you say something, was it difficult to make the language sort of something that could be published?
So, and I think, just for clarity, the question was around the language, more about the vernacular, I think, than the swear words.
Yes.
Which, by the way, as a high school principal, when I go to get to read in a high school, and I just pick the sweariest passages, because I just don't get to do that at my own school. But I really, when I first wrote it, I really wanted to capture the voice, but I'm also a person who gets really very, very distracted by reading something that has a ton of apostrophes, and just when we try to write in dialect, sometimes I don't want it to read phonetically. I find that just too distracting. So I had picked maybe half a dozen verbs that I would choose not to conjugate correctly based on what I'd heard from my students speaking, and certain patterns of grammar that I hear just in the lunchroom, because I like to do lunch duty, and it was so distracting to I thought it was, and I shared it out with a few folks, but when I sent it down to my agent, she actually couldn't get through more than about 10 pages. So she handed it off to her assistant, James Farrell, who got all the way through, and he made some suggestions, and then I actually took another year to rewrite it, and I picked just kind of 1.5 verbs not to conjugate correctly, and simplified it quite a bit that way. But I think the spice of the just capturing just a few words was enough to capture Ian's dialect without being distracting to all the readers.
Do you have examples of what the words were?
So some of the words like don't versus doesn't, and kids in Vermont don't get that right with frequency. That would be one example. She don't come round all that often. So, and that's something I hear a lot. So she doesn't come around all that often. I changed a lot of those, but not all of them. And if you read the Sharp's Fifth, the final chapter, because the Sharp herself didn't have that much time to edit, there's more of those in that chapter. So that final chapter has a few more of those vernacular bits.
So it wasn't teenage slang or regional so much as something.
Right, yeah. And it's interesting, just, so I actually I was a linguistic anthropology minor as an undergrad, and I've always been fascinated by people's patterns of speech. And I completely forgot what I was.
It's not so, in the original draft,
Yeah.
it wasn't so much teenage slang or
Right, it wasn't.
high school speak or dialect or what words from that particular locality. It was mostly the doesn't to don't.
That sort of thing. Yeah, there were a fair amount of other. I think though that. Oh, I've done it again. See, I got up very early this morning and faced 400 students this morning. It'll come back
You've
to
answered
me.
a whole lot of that question. I'd just like to say that I really enjoyed meeting somebody that, through the book, that wasn't in the elite and both by age and like social environment. I wouldn't have met him otherwise.
Yeah, I'm glad, because that's one thing I really. A lot of the kids get a really bad rap, and what I wanted to do is kind of make this kind of an ethnography, an autobiographical fictional ethnography. Boy, I'm glad I had that sip of water. But one of the things that, I do notice is that kids raised in multi-generational households or raised by their grandparents there's an influence in their speech. Sometimes, one of the things I got called out on was, Ian ginger stepping, or the hunter, he tells a story about a hunter, ginger stepping through the woods. And the editor said, that's not a word kids use very often. And I said, well, come on up to Vermont, but yeah.
It's definitely a Vermont book.
Thank you, I'm glad.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, hi.
You mentioned all the different people that tried to name the dog what kind of dog he was. And one person, I guess, he was shocked that one person never asked him, but why did you put that? Was that a unifying thing among all people, to unify among the dog, or why did you use constantly that, we ran through the book, anybody would not try to name what kind of species the dog was?
Well, I think people like to categorize. So the question was, why do so many people ask? What's the dog's breed? For one thing, he's huge, so it is a question that people do ask, I think. But the other is that we do try to categorize things so we can kind of be done with them, and that kind of leads into Ian's whole kind of diatribe about clipboard questions, which is, there was no place on the form, really, when all these people are doing an intake. There's no place on the form for anything about his dog. So it all ends up on the other line. And so, I had a good friend who has a lot of experience, a former children's librarian. I bet once a children's librarian, always a children's librarian, but a retired children's librarian. Read the book, and she said, "This really isn't about a dog, Ken." And my obstinate defiant disorder kicked right in, and I thought, yes, it is. And then I realized, in a way, the whole it tied in with Ian's clipboard question thing, that it's not about a dog, and that everything all the systems, all of the support systems that were in place neglected to do something with the dog. When he gets sent away, the lady who did the original intake form continues to think it's a Great Dane, and didn't take it into account for him, and but I still needed to tell this story through Ian's words, not mine. And so in my response to that, I had written this piece on the drive home where Ian's thinking about the clipboard questions, and he's thinking about how everybody wants to know what kind of dog it is. And he's sort of goes on this sort of just in his own head little bit of a diatribe while he's looking out the window about why everybody wants to know what kind of dog it is, and that the dog is there because dogs do what you're supposed to do, which is just love somebody or love something and be there, right? And so that's what Ian's thinking about. And then I read it aloud, the next like a day or two later, and I thought that was so me talking, not Ian. And so it just became, Gather getting his nose marks all over the window, and Ian says, "I love that freaking dog," and that was it. But it really had, in terms of the interest, people do ask. That's one thing, but the other is we feel like we have to categorize something to do something with it so often, and that's just what was illustrated there.
If you don't mind personally I felt like if it had been a big white dog of some recognizable species, it would have been a valuable dog. But this being not knowing what species, it was just the value that Ian saw in it because he loved the dog. And it also appears to me sort of like Ian, even the little girl kind of classified, are you a dog or no, are you a boy or a man? And nobody could classify him really or the dog.
That's a lovely point. Yeah, nobody could classify.
What kind of dog it was.
Yeah.
Just because his name Gather, that to me was the whole story.
Thank you. Yeah.
Didn't matter what kind of dog.
Thank you. Yes, hi.
Would you recommend this as being a book that high schoolers should read?
Well,
Because there's so much in it. And it could have so much to do with their own parents nowadays, too.
Yeah, I think, one of the things I hoped for the book was that it tell a rural story, and both the hardships and the beauty, and that it tell a rural story beyond the rural, the rural parts of the country. And I think that we do a pretty decent job in schools, or at least we're making a concerted effort to talk about a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion. The one place where we suffer in this country on that front is talking about socioeconomic status, and in our public schools, especially in Vermont, that's the most common difference, and we don't really have a language about it. People are just super uncomfortable, and it's very, very rare that in a book talk that I've seen people actively steer away from that conversation. We just, they don't know how to talk about it. There's so much shame involved with poverty, or just wishing not to acknowledge it. And that's such a big part of the problem. So that's definitely one thing. And I'll say, one of the first big group of students I read to was in New York, and in right on the outskirts of Harlem, and it was 600 kids in the audience for the National Book Awards, and their reception was just heartwarming. You know, inner city, mostly kids of color. And this one student, you can see I use a lot of sticky notes, and this one student had more sticky notes than I do. And I said, "Oh, are you getting ready for a Socratic seminar or something?" And she said, "No, these are lines that I liked." So, yeah. Yes, hi.
I thought it was really great that the story was about a boy who was a really good person, in spite of the fact that he was growing up under really, really difficult circumstances. And it also gave the opportunity to feel empathy for a child and a mother who were the victims of substance use disorder. She didn't get into that, in a way that was really her fault. She kind of got into it because of injury and needing pain relief. And I think that it gives everybody the opportunity to be empathetic toward people who are in that situation. And especially because Ian is a good kid. In spite of all that he's going through, he is still a good person and a good kid. And I thought that was really great to portray a family like that. A very different family than a lot of people really know. But to see that they're a mother and a kid doing the best they can, and that they're really not bad people at all. They're really good people who are in a really bad situation. So I really appreciated that.
Oh, thank you.
I liked Ian a lot. He was a really good kid.
Thank you. I've met a lot of them. Yeah. Thank you. Did you?
There were a lot of emotions that were brought out when I was reading the book, and you had the feeling of empathy, sadness, anger, frustration, and I love books that are like that really turn on the emotions and make you feel. I thought it was very well written.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, the emotion piece, I was glad I was writing it up in my in the woods behind my house in my cabin, because I needed to take a lot of walks, after I got through some of the harder sections. Thank you.
The language that Ethan used, you hear kids all the time talking like that. I think this is so real.
Thank you. Hi.
I'm wondering if you had a colleague that was your inspiration for the sharp. Where did she come from?
Where did the sharp come from? Yeah, I've had many colleagues who inspire me, like the sharp. And I think one thing, I can think of one middle school teacher who we wanted to do a field trip and take our students down to Washington, D.C. And a lot of the effort fell through, and then she rented a 15-passenger van and drove kids down to Washington, D.C. And but I think that, every day our teachers rise to a level of heroics, and that's just to meet the basic requirements of the system, so it's just so busted, but our teachers are heroes, like, on a daily basis. Yes, hi.
I felt, you're an educator, so I want you to talk more about, I felt like the book challenged my understanding of knowledge.
So the challenge of, what does it mean to know something? And why, in the education system, we've come to a point where we tend to only realize or recognize, at least until a student can get to a career tech ed program, one kind of knowledge, and that's knowing. But so we've, in our education system, we've got this knowing versus know-how, and we don't recognize the know-how. And I have a friend who went to Swarthmore, Swarthmore. Is there an extra R in there, or just one R? Anyway, on his graduation day, he was driving. Leaving, and the car broke down, and he realized, he was like, I have a bachelor's. I have no idea what to do here. But he had this realization that for everything he learned, it depended on so many things working perfectly, and that's I wanted to drive that point home with. That was one in the original plot. It was the college professor was a big part of the original plot. It became a much smaller part, but it's really to make that distinction between somebody who's grown up knowing how to do things because he had to, with with this in sort of a environment where so much is provided that you can just focus on the knowledge piece. And if you ever get a chance to look at the original introduction to the Dictionary of Cultural Literacy, it is appalling. It's absolutely appalling. For start, and one thing I'll say is there is a separate entry for Nantucket. There's a separate entry for Martha's Vineyard. There's a separate entry for the Berkshires, for Cape Cod. There's one entry for Appalachia. And in it, it says it's America's, one of America's most impoverished regions. And it's the beginning of this, to me, that's where we hopped on this, sort of the whole education system kind of hopped on this bandwagon of everybody needs a chance to strive for, these are all the things you need to know. But, and he actually, at the in the introduction, I think, maybe for its time it was okay, but what it's led to now, with the gap in between, with that more focus on building know-how and building in opportunities to apply knowledge, I think we've just swung, the pendulum has swung so far, it's like a wrecking ball. So I would love to. And we're doing a lot of that in education now. There's service learning, project-based learning. I think education is recognizing it. But then, what do our newspapers publish but the test scores? And so we have at our school a celebration of learning where we invite the whole community in to see what the kids are doing, and the teachers know it way in advance, so that whatever the projects might look like, it's going to speak to everyone. So it's not just a paper with a lack of red ink on it, but we get to go in and see the beautiful things that are happening in our school. Thank you. This is what teachers call awkward silence. Yes?
I was happy to see that Ian you gave credit to Ian's grandfather teaching him his skills. I mean, he obviously sought out his grandfather to do that too, but it did remind me of my father, who knew how to do all those little skills and everything he did. And after he died, somebody he worked with, a young man, said, "I really enjoyed your father because he taught me too." So I think Ian had the curiosity, but he looked around and saw that somebody, his grandfather primarily, I think you use in the book, that taught him how to do things or to save things or to see what their worth was. And so he was catching on because he had an inclination to do that. That was good.
Yeah, I see a lot of the relationship, so about Ian's grandfather's influence on his life and knowing how to, it's sort of the farmer's way, that Ian says, his grandfather said that as a farmer you need to know how to do everything. You need to be your own plumber, the one thing you can't know how to do is make money, because if you know how to make money, you'll get out of farming real quick. Yeah, but I do see, I have a grandparent story that I want to tell. We have a couple of, a while back now, but a couple of several of our students are being raised more by their grandparents than by their parents. And in one particular family, there was I'm more or less the high school principal, and my co-principal is mostly middle school. And we had a set of grandparents who were really profound and sometimes a little bit aggressive advocates for their grandkids. And at one point, the middle school student had gotten suspended for misbehavior, substantial misbehavior. And when the student was coming back in, we had a meeting to bring them back in, and that involves the principal and usually a teacher and a guidance counselor and the family. And because it was the middle school student, I knew it was happening, but I knew I didn't have to be involved, and I was a little bit relieved. And then the grandparent got to the receptionist's window and asked to see me. And I was in my office, and I was just like, oh. And the receptionist said, "Ken, are you available?" And I said, yes. So they came in, and the grandmother had 2 copies of Gather, and she wanted me to sign one for her and one for another person. And she said, I've read 2 books in the last 20 years. Both of them were this, because I finished it and I started back from the beginning again. Yeah. This is Carson.
Thank you for that, because you had said earlier, if I misunderstood you, that once you got the image of Ian running in the rain, you were kind of off and running. But before that, it was this idea that, oh, I really want to get together this boy from a hunting background with the daughter of a landowner. What sustained you in between? Like, how did this cricket your brain for a long time, or what kept you?
Yeah. So what sustained me from that original plot of just Ian falling in love with and then just sort of a meeting of socioeconomic cultures, right? To what became Gather, and Ian did. Ian sustained me.
Okay.
Because initially I thought, okay, well, I'm writing this as a young adult novel. Then I thought, well, geez, it feels kind of like a crossover novel, maybe like Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, kind of, but then I stopped writing it for anybody except Ian. And I just felt like I owed it. As he became more real, he's not based on any one kid at all, but as he became more real, I was just writing it for him.
Are you a fan of Bird by Bird?
Oh, I've read it a very long time ago. Bird by Bird by.
I'm rereading it, and literally I just read the character chapter, and I'm like, oh, that's what she said. The love of the character.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, Annie Lamott, right?
Yep.
Yep. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, hi.
Has anybody made parallels between your book and Demon Copperhead?
Me being the first one, yes. When I finished, I finished this, and the manuscript was in. So Demon Copperhead, parallels between this book and Demon Copperhead, and yeah. When I finished Demon Copperhead, I thought, oh my gosh, Barbara Kingsolver had already done it. She beat me to it. But then I was thinking, a number of folks have made the comparison, but I also think there's Vermont nationally is idealized, and Appalachia, it's still kind of in vogue it's still kind of okay in most circles to some way disparage that whole region. And it's difficult in very different ways to be a person who's really struggling, here in an idealized place or there in a place that's disparaged. The experiences are very, very different, but equally as hard. And I would love I'd love to have somebody else make a lot of comparisons between the two. Yeah. Yes, hi.
So you didn't get any examples from your students? I mean, I was so moved by the thrift store segment.
Yeah.
And I just wondered if you had an experience or
So the thrift store, the shirt incident?
the shirt incident.
So this is actually the second time only, and probably, between Vermont Reads, I don't know how many of those through the Vermont Humanities that I've done, but in various, you're the second person who's brought it up, and that's just an indication of how hard it is to talk about socioeconomic. People shy away from that chapter. People don't bring it up. That Ian gets. Ian bought this shirt with his own money from a thrift store that ended up at the thrift store because some guy who had plenty of shirts like that left it lying around but recognized it, and Ian's accused of stealing it. And that was the hardest chapter for me to write. And I've seen firsthand, not an incident exactly like that, but real clear indicators that we treat kids from poverty in our public school system very differently than we teach parents who have the means to, and the articulation and all of the, whatever. There's just such a, there's a profound classism in our public school system in a lot of places, and it goes under the radar, but I think that's one of the reasons why it's so hard to teach diversity, equity, and inclusion in Vermont when that's one of the subjects that we won't touch or talk about. So one person brought it up, and she shared that she wore thrift store shirts until 7th grade, and clothes until 7th grade, and then when she started 7th grade, she wore her first new dress to school. And she was really excited, and she went to school, and she said nobody noticed. But that finally that conversation kind of broke the ice, and everybody in the room just talked about their experiences.
It was just so, the injustice was so profound.
Thank you. Yeah.
It's real.
Yes, hi.
It took me forever to read this book. As a teacher, I had to keep putting it down. I would read, and all of a sudden, I'd have this flash of a memory in my head of who I wanted to help and how could I, and meetings and data collecting and, trying to put everything together to make it better. So I had to keep putting it down. My husband at one point said to me, "Are you still reading that book? You never take that long to read that book."
Yeah.
And the other thing about the dog is, the dog used to visit my classroom once a week on Wednesdays. And after about the second or third time, Lottie would come to the room with her owner. It would be like you could hear a pin drop in my room. And everybody was so well behaved and so attentive, and it was just amazing. I says, "Oh, it must be Wednesday. Lottie's coming." For
Yeah.
a bit of, just to have a dog in the room.
Calming influence of an animal, of a dog in the room.
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course the gather, and he had to have the dog, and it was like, oh my God, it was just amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a lot of teacher, career teachers and teachers who have.
Then I had to read about you too, and that's how I found out about your teaching and about this, and I'm going like, oh, that's how he knows all this.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yes.
How has the book impacted you as an educator or a writer?
Well, the success certainly feels like a little bit of pressure. How's the book impacted me? as a writer, quite a bit. As an educator, you know, in my day job, when you step into a school, 400 teenagers tend to just think about themselves, you know. So I forget, that's a persona I pretty much leave at noonish on Sunday when I leave my cabin and come back down to the house. So I think what, like I said, you know, it allows me to swear in front of students when I'm reading. It's also great. I think one of the biggest impacts on me is the number of students who want to write, who want to tell their own stories. It's just something I hope that we can expand upon, because so many kids have, you know, they're encouraged and emboldened. My favorite letter that I received was from a student who was kind of on his sort of third chance and was doing he was mostly remote from school still, and part of he had to write his own autobiography, and he couldn't afford a book, and he said, you know, so I sent him a book. I sent him a copy because he had to return the one he was reading, but he thanked me for, you know, sort of thanked Ian for being for giving him the guts to go ahead and tell the hard stuff. Yeah. I think it is time. Thank you.
Take as many little bits break as you would like. I think Ken is willing to sign.
Yeah, happy to sign books.
And there's snacks. Oh my gosh, there's snacks. Get out of the way.
The chart was so well